Good evening, Terra Nova. How you guys doing tonight? I invite you to stand up. Let's sing together. I was buried beneath my shame. Who could carry that kind of weight? It was my tomb till I met you. I was breathing but not alive. All my failures I tried to hide. It was my tomb till I met you. You called my name and I ran out of rain, out of the darkness to your glorious day. You called my name and I ran out of rain, out of the darkness to your glorious day. Now your mercy has saved my soul. Now your freedom is all that I know. The old man knew Jesus when I met you. You called my name and I ran out of rain, out of the darkness to your glorious day. You called my name and I ran out of that rain, out of the darkness to your glorious day. I needed rescue, my sin was heavy, the chains break at the weight of your glory. I needed shelter, I was an orphan, but you called me a citizen of heaven. When I was broken, you were my healing. Your love is the air that I'm breathing. I have a future, my eyes are open, 'cause when you called my name, I ran out of that rain, out of the darkness to your glorious day. You called my name when I ran out of that rain, out of the darkness to your glorious day. Hey, I was just thinking while we were singing that song, when we gather like this, we don't always kind of know exactly what's going to happen, but we always know when we gather and God is here with us that something good is going to happen. James wrote, every good and perfect gift comes from the Father. So we're going to sing this song tonight in celebration of all that He's given us. Here we go. Every good and perfect gift comes down. Everything we ever needed we found in you. Every good and perfect gift comes down. You're the God who's more than enough. Like you give away your love, like you give us everything. Oh, you give us everything, everything we need. Every good and perfect gift comes down from you. Every good and perfect gift comes down. Everything we ever needed we found in you. Every good and perfect gift comes down. You're the God who does not change. No, your goodness stays the same. And now your mercy's all we know. It follows us everywhere, everywhere we go. Tempts us, we will never say we are tempted by you. Oh, and when things seem hopeless, we will never say that there is nothing you can do. 'Cause we know your word is true. Good and perfect gift comes down from you. Every good and perfect gift comes down. Everything we ever needed we found. Oh, we found in you. Every good and perfect gift comes down. Every good and perfect gift comes down from you. Every good and perfect gift comes down. Everything we ever needed we found in you. Every good and perfect gift comes down. unfold, still your love fought for me. You've been so good to me. I felt no worry, still you paid it all for me. You've been so kind to me. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, it chases me down, fights till I'm found. He's the 99. I couldn't earn it, I didn't deserve it. Still you gave your life away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, it chases me down, fights till I'm found. He's the 99. I couldn't earn it, didn't deserve it. Still you gave your life away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God.
Hey, do you want to pray with me? Lord, I pray that tonight as it comes to what we believe about ourselves and maybe just different things we've been told by other people, maybe lies we've held on to, I pray that those ideas would actually be shaped first and foremost by who you are and how you've responded to us. God, by your grace, by your unconditional pursuit of us, by that love that never leaves us. And I pray that would strengthen us. I pray that it would surprise us, maybe even overwhelm us, to be reminded of just the great love you have for us, your children. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Well, hey, welcome to Terra Nova. I'm so glad you guys are here tonight. We are in the middle of a series called Investigating Jesus, and this weekend we're going to be looking at the true turning point in Luke's account of Jesus' life.
Yes, absolutely. So with that in mind, I've got a question for you. You can kick it out in just a moment, but what's been like a turning point in your life? Maybe a time where your life direction was going one way, and all of a sudden this thing happened, and then everything kind of changed, a turning point for your life.
Yeah, that's a big question, I know. But maybe just take a moment and get coffee with someone later and talk about it in depth. But ask someone next to you or a couple people that question. Go for it.
Again, this is Ashley. My name's Scott. We want to welcome you to Terra Nova, and thank
Welcome.
you so much for being with us this weekend. I hope you're having a great time so far. And hey, if you happen to be newer to Terra Nova, it's one of your first times, maybe your first time tonight, we just want to thank you for being our guests. You could be doing a bunch of different things this weekend. You could just say, hey, I'm not going out at all. It rained a little bit, and yet you're here, and we're so thankful for that. We hope that you just enjoy what we're doing tonight and really connect with the things that we've got going on. And on your way in, probably chances are we're able to hand everybody one of these programs. So if you got a program like this, you can open it up. You'll find a few different things in that program. You could read about some things. You'll see, hey, we've got a barbecue that's coming up in just a few weeks, so that's exciting. As you turn around, you'll see we've got things about Easter, because Easter's right around the corner. You can read about that. But with this program, the thing we'd love to have you start with is this back flap. This is what we call our Connect card, and we love hearing from everybody via this Connect card every week. And so you could fold it over, just tear this guy off. You could also find the Connect card on our Terra Nova app. But we love hearing from everybody, like I said. So you can share as much or as little information as you feel comfortable sharing. If you've got questions about who we are as a church or things that we're doing, you can indicate those. You can check some boxes. A lot of people just love sharing updates on what's going on in their lives, how they're doing, how we can support or pray for them. And so we'd love to hear from you. Again, if it's you're one of your first times, this would just give us an opportunity to thank you for being our guest. And so spend a moment or two working on that Connect card, and we'd love to hear from you. And as you're doing that, you'll see we've got a few other things in the program. We've got message notes you could pull out in a moment. And we've got this flyer on one side. It lets you know about our women's retreat. Sign-ups are happening right now. So ladies, if you haven't already signed up and you're planning on going, now is a great time to do that. You can find more information if you scan this QR code, or right after the service this evening, you can head out to the lobby. We've got a table in there, get more info. And that's on one side of this flyer. But then on the other side, we let you know about this Not So Random Acts of Kindness weekend that's coming up next weekend. And so Ashley, can you share a little bit more about what that is?
I'm really excited to do that, Scott. So we really desire to be a community that follows the way of Jesus. And we love to do that by living a service-oriented life. And the way that we're kind of playing with that is doing a not so random acts of kindness weekend. I know it's a mouthful, but just follow me here. So basically, I don't know if you guys know, there's a national random acts of kindness day. There's a day for everything. If you're a doodle mom, if you like anything. Pancake day, donut day, there's something, but this one's fun. And we thought, one day, National Random Acts of Kindness, that's weak. Every day being kind, that's too much. So what if we just do a weekend of kindness and have it be really intentional, though? So if you take out this green flyer, you will see so many ways that we are going to be blowing the socks off of our community and just finding random ways to be kind. And we have lots of things coming. We have a free coffee giveaway. We'll be kind of going to a couple different sports parks and handing out coffee to really tired parents who are there to cheer their kids on. Like, they need that, okay? We actually did that before, and it was super successful. People were so appreciative. So sign up for that if you're interested. You can have some of the coffee, too. There's a beach cleanup down in Newport. I'll be there with my toddler, trying to not have her eat trash. She's into that right now. So I'm going to tell her, pick it up. We pick it up. But come down here. Bring your kids. It's super easy. We'll be hanging out at the beach afterwards. And then Village of Hope is the way to serve as well. Young adults and high schoolers are going to be packing backpacks for kids in need. And then there's a yard cleanup project. If you're like, I love yard cleanup, that's you. Sign up for that one. But we would love for you to find a way to just say, hey, I'm going to be part of this Random Acts of Kindness weekend. Even though, that's a long time to be kind. But we can do it as a community. And we want to be intentional. So let's, sign up right here on the form or online on the app. We'll connect with you this week and make sure you have all the details you need for the one thing that you're signing up for. And we just can't wait to be intentional as a community.
Yeah, I love that. One day is 2 weeks. So we're doing a weekend. That's fantastic there. Very good. So that's happening next weekend, not just one day, but then to cap off that weekend, we decided we're going to do something just to really fuel us as we look forward to the season ahead of us, a season that includes Easter. And so next Sunday evening, we're going to do a night of worship that's going to be here at our facility at 7 Watney, a time for us just to get together, to be reminded of who God is, of his character, of his nature, how he responds to us. We're going to celebrate communion. We're going to have some focused prayer. It's going to be this night that's really intended just to strengthen us, to encourage us, and to focus us on who God is. And so that's going to be happening next Sunday night, 5 o'clock, and we'd love to invite you out. It'll be a relaxed environment, kind of family-friendly. So if you got little ones, we've got an unhosted nursery and a toddler room that's going to be available in case you need to take them out into that. But we'd love just to invite you to come to not just celebrate the Not So Random Acts of Kindness weekend, but to come back and just to be fueled up as we wind that down next Sunday evening with the night of worship.
Yeah, I love that. It'll be just a great way to celebrate the different ways we all came together that weekend too. So I hope you guys show up and we can all just talk about all the fun ways we served, and it'll be a great night. But we're really excited you're here this weekend. Again, I said we're in the middle of a really good series. It's going to be leading up to Easter, and tonight we're going to be jumping into part 5 of Investigating Jesus.
Well, I don't know about you, but I think some of the most admirable people I've ever met are people who might be called believe in spite of people. Here's what I mean by that. These are people who are facing or have faced just incredible hardship, pain, suffering, difficulty, and yet they face it with this incredible integrity and strength and faith and even joy. They have this thing that the Apostle Paul once called peace that surpasses understanding. It's like, it doesn't even make sense that you are the way you are. And I look at them, or maybe you look at a person like that and you're like, how are you even still standing? And yet they're solid, like they're in good shape. And Dr. Francis Collins had actually met a number of people like this while doing rounds in med school in North Carolina. Dr. Collins has his PhD from Yale. He has his MD from University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. He was most recently the director of National Institutes of Health, appointed by President Obama. Right now, he's the science advisor for President Biden. Before that, he was the director of the Human Genome Project for many, many years. Now, a genome is an organism's complete set of DNA, which includes all of its genes, 3.1 billion letters of information inside every single one of your cells. It's just like remarkable, and the Human Genome Project was one of the most important achievements in science in recent generations. Dr. Collins is probably one of the world's foremost experts on DNA. Well, when Francis Collins was 27, he was an atheist, a young med student or a young doctor doing his residency, making rounds at a hospital in North Carolina. He found himself often interacting with terminal patients. And those patients were often talking about things like their faith and heaven with such confidence. I mean, they had peace and they had joy and they had courage. And Collins had grown up in a family or a home with agnostic parents, or just really kind of non-religious in any kind of way. And so all of this was really just kind of provocative to him and kind of new to him and a little bit unnerving. In fact, he writes in his book, The Language of God, he writes, if faith, here's what he kind of felt during this season, if faith was a psychological crutch, which is kind of where he was inclined to go with it, then it must be a very powerful one. Because if it was nothing more than a veneer of cultural tradition, I mean, he's in the South, it's North Carolina, if it's just something that Southern people do or something like that, why were these people not shaking their fists at God and demanding that their friends and family stop all this talk about a loving and benevolent supernatural power? And they're dying, and it doesn't appear as though God is answering their prayers, but they're so positive. I mean, they're so solid. And so one afternoon, he was looking in on a patient with a terminal disease whom he had spoken with a number of times, and she had talked to him about her faith on a number of occasions. And this time, as he's talking with her, she says, Dr. Collins, I've told you what I believe. Doctor, what do you believe? And his face got flushed, according to his own story, and he kind of stammered out, I'm not really sure. And that question right there ended up changing his life. It was like a turning point in his life. And he writes this, faced with my, and here's his phrase. This is not my phrase, it's his phrase. Faced with my willful blindness. He said, faced with my willful blindness and arrogance. Willful blindness, in other words, I haven't seen and I don't know that I want to see. I'm not really looking. I don't know and I don't know that I want to know. I'm not asking questions. There might be more, but I haven't explored it. I haven't looked to see if there's more. Faced with what he says, his willful blindness, he began a journey to see what could be seen, to investigate. And in the end, he writes, the claims about Jesus were so compelling. The evidence in his mind was more than just sufficient, it was convincing. Evidence not just for the historical Jesus, which we've been talking about in this series, but for the existence of God, hence the title of his book, The Language of God. And and he says, once he really looked and asked questions and investigated, it seemed like there was more than enough evidence to put his faith in this Jesus. And we began this series with a statement that might sound a little surprising, that the first followers of Jesus were actually not at all interested in blind faith. They didn't want to believe something just because they wanted to believe and they didn't know for sure, and they didn't want to believe Bible stories and fables and such that would just comfort them and give them hope. They didn't want blind faith. They wanted to know the certainty of the truth of the things that they had been taught. In fact, that phrase comes from one of the first biographers of Jesus' life. And this really was the motivation behind all of the biographers of Jesus' life. One of them, named Luke, makes it explicit. Now, Luke, I love Luke because Luke, we've been saying in the series, he was not one of the original followers of Jesus at all. He wasn't even Jewish, which means he had no dog in the hunt. He had nothing he had no need for the story to be true or anything, no emotional need to be filled by it. He was a physician, which meant he was highly educated and a remarkably accurate historian. And he writes a 2-volume historical work on Jesus and the early Jesus movement, which was considered so reliable and so accurate and so well written and frankly so powerful, like in a really disruptive way and kind of a punk rock kind of way, so disruptive and powerful that it was preserved and it was copied and it was handed on and it's copied and handed on, and eventually it was collected into the documents that we came to call the books, or ta Biblia, the Bible. In other words, and here's what we've been saying in this series, we don't believe Luke's account of Jesus' life because it's in the Bible. It's the other way around. Luke's account is in the books we call the Bible because it was from the beginning considered reliable and accurate from the beginning. And so he opens his account addressing a very wealthy, powerful man named Theophilus, who has apparently just begun to follow Jesus. He's starting to hear these stories and taking a next step and then another next step. And he wants to know, like you do and like I do, the certainty, the accuracy of what he's been taught. And so here's what Luke writes to him. He says, many have undertaken to draw up an account of the things that have been fulfilled among us. In other words, this isn't years and generations ago. This isn't long, long ago in a land far, far away. This is our generation, Theophilus. Like, this happened among us just as they were handed down to us by those who were from the first eyewitnesses, eyewitness testimony and servants of the word. And then he says, since this is true, with this in mind, and since I myself have been carefully investigating everything from the beginning, since I have been on this journey for decades, accumulating source material and cross-referencing it and cross-examining this material, I too have decided to write an orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus, so that you may know the certainty, the accuracy with confidence of the things that you have been taught. You've heard stories, Theophilus. You've maybe even heard from some of the eyewitnesses and some of the accounts, but I want you to know the backstory, and I want you to know the history. I want you to know the whole story, and I want you to know the accuracy of it, the accuracy with confidence. This isn't just you should have more faith and you should just believe and stop asking all those pesky questions, Theophilus. No. I want you to have the evidence. I want you to know with certainty. Well, previously on Investigating Jesus, Jesus is traveling through Galilee and he's teaching, and though his reception in his hometown of Nazareth was let's just say less than positive, the news of Jesus has begun to spread like wildfire, and he has now begun to invite people to follow him, to be his disciples. And that was the word that they would have used in their social context for someone who was an apprentice to a master teacher, followed them around, learned everything from them, including not just their teachings, but their very way of life. And so he's begun to gather some people to follow him like that. But these are not the kinds of people that any other rabbi would have ever invited into that kind of apprenticeship, because everything with Jesus is always kind of weird and different and not like normal. And so the first person in Luke's story that he invites is a fisherman named Simon, who we often call Peter. And Simon's reaction when Jesus connects with him is, "Get away from me, Lord. I'm a sinner." Like, I don't know what kind of guy you think I am, but I'm not that kind of guy. I'm not a good person. I'm not the kind of person who becomes the student of a rabbi. And Simon assumes that Jesus is just like every other holy guy, every other religious person that he's ever met. And therefore, Jesus shouldn't want to have anything to do with him. But Jesus doesn't even flinch. Jesus doesn't even blink. He just looks at Simon and says, "Follow me. Follow me, Simon, and you will catch people." It was as we said last week, the invitation of a lifetime. Now, if Simon thought Jesus was kind of scraping the bottom of the barrel by inviting him to be the apprentice, he hadn't seen nothing yet, because the next person Jesus bumps into is one of Capernaum's notorious tax collectors, a guy named Matthew. And Jesus invites Matthew to follow him too. And if Simon had ever felt kind of special to be invited, that just really quickly lost its luster. It's like, wow, okay, so I guess that's nothing special at all. Apparently, we're just inviting anybody and everybody, like the worst of the worst. Apparently, everyone's invited and everyone's included. But see, Jesus had come to change the way that we think about religion and the way we think about who's inside and who's outside. And for Jesus, being a sinner did not disqualify you from following him. Being a sinner doesn't actually disqualify you from following Jesus. In fact, according to Jesus, it's a prerequisite. He only invites sinners. Like, that's the only people that he's calling. And Jesus' depiction of the kingdom of God, Jesus' depiction of the rule and the reign of God was inviting. It was relational. It was without borders or limits. And it seemed like everybody was invited and included. And not surprisingly, that made him wildly popular with some people and extraordinarily dangerous and offensive to some others. And so, as he gathers more followers, and as he gathers crowds and crowds of fans, he also attracts a growing and very powerful, entrenched group of foes. And that's where we pick up the story today. Luke chapter 9, once when Jesus is praying in private, his disciples are with him, he asks them, "Hey, guys, who do the crowds, these crowds of fans that are following us everywhere, who do they say I am?" Now, Jesus isn't like gauging poll numbers for his candidacy. It's not a test of his likability or anything like that. He is probing to see what the disciples have understood so far. They've been with him for a little while now. The answers are all over the board. They replied, "Well, some say John the Baptist." Now, by this time in the story, we met John a few weeks ago, early into the story. By this time, John has been killed by Herod. Some say you're John the Baptist, like risen from the dead, I guess. Others say you're Elijah, another long dead prophet, or that one of the other prophets from long ago has come back to life. In other words, people have no idea, Jesus. Like, they are all over the board. They have no idea what to make of you, except that something supernatural, something unexpected and extraordinary is apparently happening. And Jesus is taking that all and he's like, okay, that's weird. Okay. But you guys, you've been with me a while now. What about you? Who do you say I am? And it's an epic moment. It becomes part of the hinge point or the turning point in Luke's biography of Jesus. And Peter like looks around and he's like, okay, so we're doing this. Like, we're doing this now? Like, we're going to say this out loud, are we? He says, okay. Well, we say, you're the Messiah. That's what we say. We say you're God's Messiah, or literally God's anointed one. This is a term just laden with so much meaning and expectation. You're the deliverer, the conqueror, the hero, the superhero. You're the next Moses, the next King David, the next Joshua conquering the promised land. You are God's ultimate and final king. We say, you're him. You are it. And Peter lays it out there, and the group gets really quiet, and they all turn and look at Jesus. And Jesus strictly warned them not to tell this to anybody. It's like, what? Are you kidding me? Hey, if this is true, you should be telling everybody, shouldn't you? Wow, what do you mean? Don't, hey, interesting thought. Don't tell that to anyone else. Why? The answer is because Peter got the answer right, but he has no idea what the answer means. He has no idea what he thinks and what they all assume about that word right there is completely upside down and absolutely wrong. And that's when Jesus begins to flip it over on them and deconstruct all of their assumptions. And here's how Jesus responds to this. He said, the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders. The Son of Man is a title that's actually taken out of the prophet Daniel 7. It's a title that Jesus often used for himself that was taken from this extremely popular scene or vision that the prophet Daniel has of all of these beasts who are trampling God's people. And then the Messiah, the Son of Man, arrives in the clouds of heaven, and he receives from the throne, the Ancient of Days, he receives authority and power and to rule all of the nations of the earth. It's like this great, great moment in Daniel 7. The Son of Man must suffer? I don't think so, Jesus. I didn't see that in that story at all. Be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, which are strange bedfellows, by the way. We don't know this, but commonly, but those people didn't usually get along. That's like you'll be rejected by the Republicans and the Democrats. It's like these are people who don't agree on anything, but apparently they are going to somehow form a united front of opposition and conspire together to kill him. But that end would not be the end of the story. And it's just shocking. It's really, honestly, it's incomprehensible. They have no category for this. Jesus is saying not just that it will happen, but that it has to, that it must happen, that it's somehow on purpose, that this kingdom of his would be a kingdom really like none other. And he would be a king like no other, the king who would lay down his life for his subjects. This is an entirely new narrative being written. And that was not the path that any of them had in mind, not a single one of them. And it's nothing, by the way, nothing they ever would have made up. And then it just gets worse. Then he says to them, and whoever wants to be my disciple, they must deny themselves. They must say no to themselves and take up their cross daily and follow me. In other words, here's what he says. I'm going to Jerusalem to die. Who's coming with me? Who's coming with me? Who wants to follow me and die too? Which is not exactly the halftime locker room speech they were looking for, right? Because up to this point, you got to know, following has been fun. Following Jesus has been amazing. They're famous. Everybody wants to be them or take selfies with them. And all of the uppity elitists are all threatening everything, which again is just kind of punk rock, and that's cool too. But suddenly, that doesn't sound fun anymore. That's not fun at all. And for us, this idea of carrying our cross, that's kind of symbolic, right? People talk about having their cross to bear, and we each have our own cross to bear. It's like, yeah, I have my own personal hardship, and you have your own personal hardship. For them, this is literal. They had all seen and heard and smelled actual crucifixions, and to carry your cross, to be seen carrying your cross, was part of the ritualized process of execution which the Romans had perfected. That when a person was carrying their cross through the town, it meant you are already dead. You are a dead man walking. In other words, Jesus is saying, this is what it means to truly follow me. If you want to go where I'm going, if you want to go the path that I walk, and for many of them, this would be literally true of them. It means to deny yourself and take up your cross, or you could put it this way, to have renounced your right to your own life your way before anybody ever takes it from you. I've already renounced my right to my life my way before anybody even has a chance to do that for me. I have pre-decided that my life is over. But disguised in this ominous declaration is an extraordinary invitation. Here's what he says next. For whoever wants to save their life, which by the way is all of us, right? Everybody wants to save their life, hold on to their life, protect their life. Whoever wants to save their lives, yeah, that's me, will lose it. And that's all of us too. I mean, we all know this. Everyone dies, no matter how well we try to take care of ourselves and preserve our health, or how much we try to hold on tightly to our lives, no matter how safe we try to stay. Everybody, in the end, loses their life. And in the meantime, if you only live for yourself and your life, you will have nothing to show for your life and for yourself. And in the end, Jesus says, you will lose yourself. But here's the invitation. Here's the invitation part. But, he says, but whoever loses their life for me, whoever pre-decides, whoever loses it on purpose for me will save it. And in this moment, Jesus is inviting them, and he's inviting us to live our lives and lose them with purpose. Everybody ends up somewhere. Some people end up somewhere on purpose, and Jesus is inviting us to live our lives and give up our lives on purpose, a noble, much bigger than all of us kind of purpose, an eternity-changing purpose, and frankly, to be communities who live our lives and lose them on purpose in order to change eternity. And Jesus is like, there is so much more to this life than this life. There is so much more to this life than holding on to this life. You were made for more. Well, Peter and the boys, once again, have a decision to make. And Jesus has kind of created a crossroads for them. Do they stay up north? Is this where they peel away? Do they stay up north and fish their lives away and stay safe and away from the Romans and die forgotten as old men? Or do they accept an invitation to live and die with purpose and eternal purpose? It's like their brave heart moment, right? And we have that decision to make too. It's all of our decision. And frankly, I think it's a decision we have to make over and over again. Whoever wants to be my follower must deny themselves, say no to themselves, take up their cross. That includes us as well. And the question becomes, so what about me? Like, what about you? Will we be consumed with preserving our lives and building our lives and protecting our lives and accessorizing our lives, which is so tempting to do, like especially where we live and how we live, preserving our lives that in the end will not be preserved? Or will we follow Jesus? Will we follow Jesus, just letting him take us wherever he's going? Letting him take us wherever he wants our lives to go, wherever his kingdom is going? Will we say, I'm all in, my answer is yes, before I know what the question is? Will we pre-decide that our life is already over? I've already died. Now what you got for me? In fact, the Apostle Paul, who writes letters a number of years after this scene, but many years before Luke would ever write his biography. In fact, Paul writes some of the earliest Christian literature that we have record of. He writes letters beginning in the early 50s AD, and this letter is one of his very first letters written to communities right around the area that got struck by the earthquake in Turkey recently. It's called the letter to the Galatians, and he writes this. Here's how he makes this statement. Here's like how he has answered this question. He says, I've been crucified with Christ. I no longer live. Like I have already pre-decided that my life, my rights, my way is already over. I've been crucified with Christ. I no longer live. It's now Christ, the Messiah, living in me, and the life I now live in this body, I just live by my absolute faith and confidence and trust in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself up for me. I read a line like that and I think, Do I feel that way? Have I made that kind of declaration with my own life? Am I willing to say that? Am I ready to say that? Well, back to our story. Peter and the others, I don't think would ever forget that day. Again, it was just one more of a number of crossroads that they continued to seem to find themselves at in following Jesus. And it would have been so much easier and so much safer, truly, to stay in Galilee. And this story, Luke's story of them and Peter's, it just never would have been told. We would never have known their names. In fact, we said last week, Peter had no idea what hung in the balance of his decision to follow Jesus to Jerusalem. And by the way, neither do we. We don't have any idea what hangs in the balance either. We have no idea who hangs in the balance of our decision to hold on to our lives or to follow with reckless abandon. Like, which one am I? And what hangs in the balance, we may never know. Well, about 8 days after that, Luke tells us, Jesus took Peter and James and John, and they went with him up on a mountain to pray, which was ordinary enough, pretty common, especially for Jesus. That's the kind of thing he would often do. But things get weird. And we kind of talked about this last week. Now, I don't know if you remember, do you remember like your first experiences ever looking through maybe a microscope in school or maybe a telescope? You remember what it was like to look at something that you thought you had seen? You thought you knew exactly what it was and what it looked like, and now you're looking at it through this microscope or through this, realizing that beyond the ordinary thing, the piece of dirt or the piece of seaweed or that dark patch of night sky, there was this entire world of color and texture and interest. There was so much beyond what you thought you could see. Well, Luke describes an experience that he had no doubt gotten from Peter and perhaps confirmed by John as well. And here's what happens next. While Jesus was praying, his face changed somehow. It doesn't really say how. And his clothes became really bright, like they were shining almost. Now the Hebrew scriptures, and Peter and James and John would have known this so well, describe a small handful of moments like this, where it's like the veil of ordinariness that keeps us from seeing what's going on beyond the situation, like that veil gets pulled back and this bigger reality is revealed. And most of us don't have experiences like that. Not very often, certainly not every day, maybe not ever, and apparently they didn't really either. But in reality, there's actually a huge percentage of people around the world, and in fact, 1 in 5 Americans say that they've had some kind of really meaningful supernatural experience, like something that was spiritual and it was supernatural, usually completely unexpected, like a vision, only maybe more than just a vision. It's like tangible and it's real and it's at the same time kind of transcendent. And such people often remember those moments, and maybe you've had one, in vivid detail, describe them as being hugely significant and life-changing for them. And Luke describes a moment like that where this veil is pulled back and there's something more to what is being seen than meets the eye. And the story, as Luke tells us, is just really thick with like these intentional references and cross-references to the Hebrew scriptures, scenes especially of Moses, and then later Elijah, 2 of the most legendary of all of the prophets from the Hebrew scriptures, both of whom, their story said, had these experiences with God on a mountain. Moses going famously up to Mount Sinai to get the 10 Commandments. You're familiar maybe with that scene, seen the movie at least. And he's enveloped while he's up there by this cloud of God's glory, and it just starts to radiate in him. He comes back like he's got a bad sunburn. He's just like shining kind of. And then Elijah, in a very different scene, running for his life, questioning God in desperation, wanting to die, and God meets him on a mountain, changes the course of his life. Moses and Elijah appear on this mountain as Jesus is praying, and they spoke to Jesus about his departure, or literally his exodus. They spoke to him about his exodus, which he was about to bring to fulfillment in Jerusalem. His exodus, which kind of like the exodus that Moses himself had led out of Egypt an exodus that would lead multitudes and multitudes of people out of darkness and out of slavery into freedom and light and grace and significance. And they're processing with Jesus the meaning and the significance of his impending suffering and what is about to happen to him at Jerusalem. Well, Peter and the guys, they've been a little groggy. Jesus had a way of praying for like a really long time. They'd be like, get a little tired, a little sleepy. They're sitting but now they are wide awake. They are wide awake, wide-eyed, and they see Jesus in this state of like, there's God's presence is just radiating through him and around him. There's something going on there, and they are wide-eyed when it becomes clear that the moment is ending. And that's when Peter does something that's just so human, trying to contain it, trying to maybe draw it out a little longer. Like, can we just extend this? Can we try to hold on to this moment and maybe control it a little bit? And he blurts out, Master, it's a good thing that we're here. Let us build some shelters. One for you and Moses and one for Elijah. Now, shelters, that word, and Luke's readers would have picked up on this, that's related to one of the greatest festivals that Israel had through their calendar year, once a year, commemorating the Exodus. Get this is kind of fun. It's called the Festival of Shelters or the Festival of Tabernacles. It took place over an entire week, and people would move out of their houses and build these little tents. Outside, like the entire village. Like imagine your whole street, and everybody just moves out of their house for a week and lives in their front yard in tents. Kind of cool. It was like a different vibe, and it was called the Feast of Shelters or the Feast of Tabernacles, the Feast of Tents. He's like, can we build some shelters? And like maybe this thing doesn't have to end so quickly. Like maybe we can draw this out for like a couple of days and just be here together, because it's really good that we're here. And then Luke adds this line that everybody already knows. I think he writes this kind of with a smirk in his face. He's like, yeah, Peter had no idea what he's saying. Which is maybe typical Peter. I don't know. He's just like saying stuff. He has no idea what he's saying. And that's when a cloud enveloped them. And again, there's just textures from the stories of the Exodus and Moses up on the mountain, the cloud of God's. And so while Peter is saying this, there's this cloud that comes, and that freaks them out. Of course, it would freak me out too. And a voice is heard in the cloud, similar to the voice that spoke when Jesus was baptized, saying, "This is my son," quoting Psalm 2. And then Isaiah 42, whom I have chosen. And then finally quoting Deuteronomy, the words of Moses himself, where Moses had said, there will be a prophet who will come later. There will be a prophet who will come, and you must listen to him. You must listen to him. This is my son, whom I have chosen. Listen to him. And just like that, it's over. Just like that, it's over, and they found Jesus alone. And not surprisingly, as so many people do when they have experiences like this, they kept it to themselves. They kept it to themselves. They didn't tell anyone what they had seen because they didn't really know what they had seen, wondering what it was all about, wondering what it all meant. And what they understood at that time from those words was certainly not what they would later come to understand or how they would come to eventually see Jesus, and certainly not how we have eventually come to see Jesus. In fact, what's really clear from their story is they didn't know what to understand at all. Like they didn't know what, they continue to power up with each other. They continue to argue over who's the greatest and best disciple. I mean, the irony is just delicious as the story goes on. It's like their blindness to what's actually happening. And by the way, our blindness too is rooted in a deep misunderstanding of God's value system. Socialized and just conditioned as we are into upside down world. It's all we know. It's how we see the world, with everything upside down, everything messed up and backwards. And as much as we complain about the way the world is, it's just all we know about what's up and what's down and what's good and what's bad and what's strong and what's weak. And conditioned as they are and conditioned as we are, they just didn't understand. They could not grasp the human perceptions that constitute what glory and greatness actually are completely upside down. Because for Jesus, his glory was not going to come the way of the kingdoms of this world. The power grab, that the Diabolos had tempted him to take in the desert, the shock and awe, the overwhelming show of power and force, that wasn't going to be his path. In his kingdom, the way of glory is a way of self-sacrificing and even suffering love. Self-sacrificing and suffering love for the good of the other and even for our enemies. And maybe that's the weirdest thing of all. Out of all of Jesus' stories and out of all the things that happen that don't seem normal, maybe the weirdest thing of all is the inverted world that Jesus seemed to live in. Mark Twain once said, the parts of the Bible I find most difficult are not the parts of the Bible I don't understand. The parts of the Bible I find most difficult are the ones I do understand all too clearly. And that's the weird stuff. I mean, it's this inverted world where suffering is glory and humility is honor and serving is greatness and forgiveness is strength. And it doesn't make any sense in our world. But here's what this centerpiece of Luke's biography means to Luke. And here's apparently what it means to Jesus and what it would come to mean to his followers. And that's simply this, that the path of true glory, of real glory in this life, is actually through self-sacrificial love. The way of glory, the path of glory, is actually a path of self-sacrificial love, and that would be his path. And eventually, it would be their path too. And Jesus' self-sacrificial love, over time, not immediately, but over time, it would redefine glory for them. It would redefine their idea of greatness, of winning, of power, of leadership. It would redefine their idea of suffering. It would reshape how they saw the world, the way Jesus did. So they come down from the mountain. And after these hinge moments, these defining moments, Luke tells us, they come down from the mountain, and Jesus resolutely set out for Jerusalem. That phrase is sometimes translated, set his face towards Jerusalem. Set his face, as in a conviction now, a determination in his stride, knowing what awaits him in Jerusalem. He set his face. And the rest of Luke's biography will take place along this journey. Along this journey, under this cloud or under this looming sense of destiny, if you will, with the repeated refrain, and as he was going, and as he was on his way, and while they were on their way where? Well, to Jerusalem. Why? To be killed. While they're on their way to Jerusalem, where he will be killed, as the fan base and the fanfare grows, and as the followers argue about who deserves the bigger piece of the pie once they get there, and as his foes grow more and more adversarial and more determined and more powerful, Jesus sets his face to Jerusalem, where the elders and the priests and the teachers will conspire with the empire to kill him. But before we get there, there's so much more of the story still to tell, and we will pick it up right there next week on part 6 of Investigating Jesus, How We Know and Why We Follow. But I want to end with a couple of questions before we wrap this up, especially for followers of Jesus. Now, here's what I mean by that. If you don't really consider yourself a follower of Jesus, you're just kind of checking it out. It's just so glad you're here. Maybe this all just seems really weird, and it really does. And if you don't really consider yourself a follower of Jesus, you just get a free pass. You don't even have to think about what I'm going to throw out, because honestly, this is crazy. This really is crazy town, and why would you ever think this way about winning and losing and greatness and glory? But if you consider yourself a follower of Jesus, here's just a couple of questions to reflect on as we wind down. The first one is this. In what way, did you kind of look at what's going on in your life, maybe what you're struggling through or what you're working through? In what way is self-protection or maybe self-preservation keeping you from really following Jesus in one or more areas of your life? Can you put your finger on anything? Does anything pop to mind or any struggle come to mind as you ask yourself that question? In what way might self-preservation and self-protection actually be keeping me from just going all in this particular issue and doing what I know Jesus wants me to do? Here's the second question. Where in your life are you being tempted to opt for the old way of winning, the old way of power or glory or recognition or fill in the blank to opt for the old way instead of Jesus's way of sacrificial love? And is there an area of your life, maybe a struggle, a conflict you're having with someone, or a thing you're trying to accomplish, and you're so tempted to just opt for the old way of powering up and winning instead of Jesus' way of sacrificial love? As you chew on those questions, I just want to close this in prayer very briefly. And I invite you to turn that question, particularly if you're a follower of Jesus, towards God and say, all right, God, is there any area of my life where I need to hear this? Where self-preservation or self-protection is keeping me from going all in and really saying yes to you? Is there any area of my life? Can you shine a light on that shadow? Can you bring some clarity to me for that? Is there any area of my life where I'm kind of opting for, or at least really wanting to opt for, the old way of winning and glory and power and recognition instead of the Jesus way, which is so weird and crazy and inverted, a way of serving the other person, a way of sacrificial love? And Heavenly Father, especially for those of us who say we follow you, I just pray that you'd shine light in both of those areas in my life and our lives going into this week, and that we would, like Jesus challenges us to do, take a deep breath, say goodbye to ourselves, and say yes to following you into the more that you have for all of our lives. And I pray that in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, hey, thank you so much for joining us this weekend for part 5 of our series. Before you take off, I want to just remind you, as we always do, if you got anything out of today and would like to watch it again or share it with somebody else, maybe say, hey, this might be something for you to listen to, you can do so on our YouTube channel at Our Terra Nova. Pass that on. And then if you're sharing it with somebody, invite them to come back and join you next week for part 6. Don't forget, Scott and Ashley had told you about this Connect card earlier in our gathering. We'd really love to hear from you. And by the way, if you haven't been baptized, we're doing baptisms on Palm Sunday. Really excited about that. Just write baptism somewhere on this Connect card. You can throw this in the offering basket on your way out. And of course, you can throw this Random Acts of Kindness weekend flyer that you checked off a few things for in that basket as well. And you can drop your offering envelope in that basket too. And we believe that generosity, even radical generosity, is just part of the Jesus path. It's what it means to live these sacrificially loving lives. And we believe that generosity, that kind of generosity, really changes the world because it always has and it always does. So thank you so much for your generosity. Of course, as we always say, you can give online on the Terra Nova app and on Venmo at Our Terra Nova. And then finally, please join us again next week for part 6. Maybe grab one of those invite cards sitting next to you. Bring somebody back with you. Really excited about next week. It's going to be a lot of fun. You're going to enjoy it too. Plus, we have that worship night happening next Sunday night after, in the evening. I think it's 5 p.m. So 5 to 6:15. Hope you guys can come out for that if it works for your schedule. God bless you guys. Have a fantastic week, and we'll see you back next weekend for part 6 of our series.